Previously on
Spider Network subseries.
We kind of left off right when Allende was coming to power.
Proving ground for the ideas of the fascist and Nazi post-war international expanded through the entire world.
The underground transnational state.
First Indochina War marked the emergence of new methods of warfare.
A young and rather handsome Ho Chi
The
Minh.
Phoenix program was an attempt to use computer networks to track supposed Viet Cong double agents.
War really advances technology.
People from the Phoenix program become consultants in American police departments.
Vietnam was a testing ground.
They started the war on drugs as a way to criminalize being black or being a leftist.
Colonia Dignidad had sort of perfected a regime of torture.
The Chileans scared us.
Left-wingers are rounded up. They start getting taken to Colonia Dignidad.
They were using this situation to get away with different kinds of research and experimentation that were not plausible for them inside the United States.
This is all part of the same project.
How the fuck do they have a chemical weapons laboratory?
This isn't some relic from the past. You live in the future that they created.
Empire never ended.
People don't realize how much of motherfuckers the French are.
Empire never ended.
So, Black Rifle Coffee.
Empire never ended.
You killed Naomi!
Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein.
So I want to start us off here with a quote from an interview with Carl Jung given to H.R. Knickerbocker for a Hearst newspaper thing in 1939. Jung says, "There is no question but that Hitler belongs in the category of the truly mystic medicine man. As somebody commented about him at the last Nuremberg Party Congress, since the time of Muhammad, nothing like it has been seen in this world. His body does not suggest strength. The outstanding character of his physiognomy," I don't know how to fucking pronounce that, physiognomy, is its dreamy look. Physiognomy, yeah, gnomes, like, of course, the classical gnomish archetype that Jung uses. I was especially struck by that when I saw pictures taken of him in the Czechoslovakian crisis. There was in his eyes the look of a seer. This markedly mystic characteristic of Hitler's is what makes him do things which seem to us illogical, inexplicable, and unreasonable. So you see, Hitler is a medicine man, a spiritual vessel, a demi-deity, or even better, a myth. Welcome to part 3 of the Spiders Network subseries. And today we are taking you underground in a couple of different ways. Our last episode focused sort of using our view of Colonia Dignidad and the post-war order, looking at it through the lens of proving grounds. And this time we're going to look through the lens of magic. And listen, I know all the ladies in the audience, you guys like that. But fellas, bear with me here. We're going to get a little out there today. We are going to do battle with Wotan. But we are talking about things strictly in the material realm. But that realm might be
real. Exactly.
I was about to say that realm just might be bigger than you think it is.
Yeah. What you were saying just then, that Jung quote, I wasn't familiar with that, but I knew his essay about Hitler as Wotan, and one of the things that that has always reminded me of is anthropological literature on shamanism, which is something that really interested me for a while. And the idea of, I think it was Mircea Eliade, the famous Romanian religious scholar, the guy who came up with the idea of the sacred and the profane. When he talked about shamanism, he called it the sickness vocation. His idea was that a shaman essentially goes around a community, and here we're talking about, very literal shamanism. We're talking about, small communities on the Eurasian steppe. A guy would literally go house to house, and as he saw it, pick up the psychic disease of everyone in the community. He would load it all upon himself and then kind of spew it back in these ecstatic, trance-like Baroque performances that could go on for days. And in so doing, he purged the tribe of all these psychic evils that were eating at it. And so a shaman's job is not, as a lot of anthropologists presumed before that, to make some sense of what's going on. A shaman is not a sort of dream interpreter or something like that. He doesn't explain to you what's going on. He takes on your sickness and then manifests it in a what I think could really only be called an art form. And I think we're going to be doing a lot of crossing over here between the boundaries of politics, art, magic, and the point at which, they're no longer explicitly or even, perceptibly different things.
I was going to say it's like a cleansing ritual, right?
Absolutely.
Taking on the evil of the community, whatever the like stain in the community is, the infection, and through like ritual and usually sacrifice, right? Cleansing and purifying the community. And I think that's going to get into a lot of things that unfortunately we have to talk about today.
Well, you say something there that does remind me quite a bit of our man Adolf Hitler.
Yeah,
which
that
is
was
this,
my point. Yeah.
There used to be a popular conception that Hitler was possessed, right? Like, understandably so. For those of you out there, Hitler famously is sort of caricatured for his speaking style. But if you watch films of him, he does have an extraordinary speaking style, which, by the way, was taught to him by a Jewish person, a mystic who he was friends with, who, in fact, I believe, before Hitler's ascension to power, buried a root in the dirt in Hitler's hometown to help bring him to power. He was a mystic employed by Hitler or some of Hitler's friends. He was killed shortly after the Reichstag fire, which he had also, by the way, predicted, which, in the context, probably not very difficult to predict considering it's a bit of a false flag operation. But there was this thought that, like, Hitler, I mean, if you watch videos of him, what you see is what you or I might term a madman if we ever saw him on the street. Somebody's gesticulating wild, totally, his eyes completely, like, insane, his mouth twisted in, like, this schizophrenic rictus, which, like, careens from being, like, an insane, like, scowl to this, like, frothing hunger. Right? And what he is, like, the way I've always thought of it there, and in fact, the way that Jung sort of describes him too, is he is taking on all of these characteristics of, like, the German idea, the German archetype. And, like, and when Jung says he became Wotan, he, like, who are we to say that he didn't become Wotan? Right?
Yeah. I think that idea is encouraged by the fact that every aspect of Hitler's performances was extremely intentional, was very, very thoroughly rehearsed. Hitler was obsessed with film of himself giving speeches, perfecting his gestures, perfecting his inflections, and seeing, out of 5 different versions of the way I deliver this line, which one gets the biggest pop from the crowd. And I don't want to go off on one of my, super long riffs here, but this one of the things that I wanted to talk about here is the idea of magic, in communities where that term still has a real currency, and what it becomes when it loses that currency in an entire community. Because in a community where magic is just accepted as, an everyday real part of life, it's not esoteric, it's not weird, it's just a set of techniques and crafts for producing changes in human consciousness. That's it. And it changes both what you think about and the way you think about it. And at a certain point, thanks to any number of forces from, rationalism and secularism to capitalism, blah, 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 this idea of magic as constrained to a given and usually, fairly small, fairly isolated cultural context falls apart. And I have a sort of Gnostic view of what happened to it, that you could say it broke in half, or you could say it had children. I prefer to think of it as kind of a mother deity that has children. And one of them is good and one of them is insane. And it acts evil, maybe isn't evil, but is insane. The good one is called art, and the insane one is called media. And they use essentially the same techniques. They understand the same things that magic has always understood. And art continues using them for, we hope, on the whole, benign purposes of expanding the mind, the imagination, so forth. But it has to do that without the kind of net of shared cultural context beneath it. An artwork now has to create all of the context that would have been assumed already in a civilization where magic is just part of everyday life. So artwork is not hampered by this, but it's deeply changed because it can't just presume, all the signs and symbols to be the same. Yeah. Media goes insane and becomes sort of the demiurgical instrument of whoever has the focus and the practice and the oftentimes insane will to master it. And I think one of the reasons the Nazis still exert such a fascination beyond their actual history and the things they did is that Nazism was the first modern political movement to discover media as inseparable from politics, to make, not just use media to document its politics, but to make media part of its politics. And
to have it function as like a weapon, essentially.
Absolutely, yeah. You have, the classic example would be Triumph of the Will. But you talking about Hitler's speeches and how much he would study all his old work to see what worked the best. And in fact, audio tape, the recording medium that gave birth to pretty much all modern recording, that was invented by the Nazis because they wanted an audio medium that was high fidelity enough that they could play Hitler's speeches over the radio and tell people that they were being broadcast live, because they wanted to create this illusion that Hitler was so superhumanly energetic that he would give the same, roaring, throat-shredding, screaming speech in 7 different cities in the same day.
Yes, and that makes sense, because that also, in keeping with this sort of tradition of magic, to somebody who isn't familiar with this technology, and, at the time, most people probably wouldn't be, certainly not the layman,
right.
It does appear that Hitler is, like you said, superhuman, and that to me is, that's a huge part of the Nazi project, is both the reclaiming of this past, era of superhuman Aryans, and the creation, the assemblage of this new sort of Superman.
Right. I see the symbiosis of media with politics in Nazism as very much kind of, completing the circle that would have begun with, magic as authority in politics thousands and thousands of years ago. And of course, after Nazism, whether or not we admit it, this symbiosis of media and politics is, that's just with us forever. That's what all politics are now. Yeah. In a very real way, there are no post-Nazi politics. Or no non-Nazi politics, even. That all the politics that have existed since then have made use of media not just to document themselves, but as a constituent of themselves. And I hate to bring up Trump as an obvious example, but you think of what his campaign would have been without media if you were just reading his policy positions in a newspaper.
Well, but you could take any American president. Think
sure.
of, Reagan Or even, think of Obama, right?
Yeah.
I mean, all of these, at different stages of like, media development, which you can kind of, go back and document, and that's going to inform, again, those developments in, media structure and technology is going to inform the way that, politicians then absorb that and use it and, have new techniques for it. So it's not going to ever look the same, but absolutely, it's completely and totally inseparable.
Well, something I want to bring up is this book that I'm holding up that, of course, our listeners can't read, which is called Dark Star Rising: Magic and Power in the Age of Trump by Gary Lachman, who is actually the bassist for Blondie, which I think is very funny. But he tries to tackle that. I haven't started reading it, but so what you guys are saying is true. I mean, this is not like a concept that isn't sort of in the zeitgeist. They are using this form of magic.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's usually talked about in this way. A lot of people talk about the aesthetics of politics, or conversely, the politics of the aesthetics, which are actually a bit different, but not germane to our conversation. But like that has been absolutely a legacy, or just something that you once done is very difficult to move out of or break out of, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's that famous Walter Benjamin line that fascism is the aestheticization of politics.
Right.
It's politics become aesthetics, and I think
that's a little simplistic.
It is, yeah, and he is also writing this really before kind of the meat of the Second World War. Certainly before the concentration camps and any public knowledge of them, and of course before knowledge of what will succeed Hitler and what will succeed World War II. And I think in retrospect, for me anyway, I find it a little bit more accurate to say that fascism is kind of politics in the attempt to become magic.
Yes.
That fascism is politics desperately trying to attain the dimensions of magic, or you could say religion, depending on which exact fascist movement you're talking about.
Yeah, I would say, or you could say the sublime, which is the perfection of the aesthetic, right? I mean, or the purest form of the aesthetic would be the sublime, which is both the most beautiful and horrific thing that you can witness, to the point of complete and total, like dissolution of the self.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially sublime with Rome.
No, but I'm serious. I mean, the experience of the sublime is that you are completely annihilated by the force of the horror and unspeakable beauty of the world. And the idea that the aesthetic of fascism, if you can kind of separate it, or that the tool of fascism is to attempt to harness that at the power of the state.
Absolutely.
Is kind of the innovation that happens in different ways between, I hate to do this, or to be pedantic, but in very different and importantly different ways, with respect to what Hitler and the Nazi Party does and what Mussolini does. And there's important differences there that we don't need to get into. But
well, I think I mentioned this last episode, but when Jung called Hitler Wotan, he referred to Mussolini as just a man.
Yeah. Well, that would make sense because it's really the Italian state, right? And that's an important difference, because the thing with the Italian fascists is that, the kind of, I mean, one way to put it is that, the Italians, they didn't think of a Volk, right? With respect to the Nazis.
Well, there's no such thing as an Italian.
Well, exactly. That's the whole thing. With the Nazis, the idea was that the people make the state, right? The Volk and the purifying of the Volk and the creation of the Volk is where the legitimacy of the state arises, right? Mm-hmm. It's actually an inversion with the Italian fascists who said, actually, no, the state makes everything. There is no concept of a people or a community or anything outside of the bounds of the state. And so there's an actual different there's a difference, or it's like kind of a mirror there in a lot of in some strange ways.
Yeah, it maybe it's just because I was raised really Catholic, but when I look at Mussolini and Italian fascism, I see it arising directly out of St. Paul and the idea of the body of the church and the body of Christ.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Italians. You can't like separate the Catholic stuff from anything Italian, really.
Yeah, this notion of the thing they came to call lo stato corporativo, the corporate state, and they meant that in the modern sense of corporate, the sense of corporation as we use it, but they also meant that in the mystical sense of the state as a body.
Yes,
exactly.
Greater than the sum of its parts. And this is, directly out of St. Paul talking about the body of the church, that, when believers in Christ gather together, they become a mystical body greater than the sum of its parts, which is metaphorically, magically identical with the body of Christ himself, which becomes animate with what, if you were a certain kind of mystic, you would call like the astral body of Christ. And in the same way, the Italian fascists have this idea of the kind of astral or mystical body of the state, irreducible to any given person, like you were just saying. And of course, a body like that, a kind of transcendent unity, can't think. So what it has to be driven by is will or destiny.
Yes,
or,
action.
Yeah.
Word, removing the division between word and action.
Right.
Everything is action.
I mean, famously, that's what the Italians really wanted to do. I mean,
Excuse
there was
me, thought and action. Sorry.
The Nazis and the Italians really, but the Italians especially, had this obsession with modernization, with speed, especially.
Yeah,
which is ironic given what we actually know about fascist Italy and its inability to do much of anything besides speed to its own demise. But this obsession with modernism that the Germans, I sort of phrased this wrong before. The Germans also had this, but the Germans looked back. They saw the future through the lens of the past. Whereas the Italians, it's a young country and it's not a peoples really. Like there are myriad different peoples in Italy. And of course there are some differentials, different people in Germany too, but there's no like you're saying, there's no volkishness there.
Right.
There's no, that's why Italian anti-Semitism was so lackluster.
Yeah.
Because they had no volkish spirit to put forth towards that. They had nothing to sacrifice the Jews to.
An important component of that too, and we talk about the aesthetics of Nazism, is that like the creation of this mythical volkish, history and people, like that began pretty much in the late 1890s, or like 1880s, 1890s, in a bunch of different kind of pre-Nazi but very anti-Semitic groups, organizations, whatever you want to call them, that all basically failed, but then, then come the Nazis out of that. Yeah. So, but, they had, talk about the appropriation of the occult. I mean, that's where the swastika comes from, right?
Absolutely.
And that starts popping up in the turn of the century in like stores with like clothing for kids and costumes and necklaces and like Bavarian, idyllic Bavarian kind of dress styles and things like that. And so this entire kind of movement to create this, like, I mean, it's really creating the mythology of Volkish culture starts emerging like much earlier than Hitler.
Right.
Absolutely.
We were talking before we actually started recording about Nietzsche. And
Wagner. We should probably mention Wagner too.
Wagner too,
definitely mention.
And Nietzsche, of course,
you can separate the art from the art. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to make that argument. I'm not going to make that argument.
I have sat through one of the 4-hour nights of the Ring of the Nibelungen, and it's pretty hard to separate the art from the artist.
yeah, fair enough.
It's also pretty hard to stay awake. But Nietzsche, of course, is hugely misunderstood and misused. We talked about last time his awful proto-Nazi sister,
Terrible
and her
sister.
awful proto-Nazi husband, publishing like Bowdlerized versions of his text and trying to make them seem proto-Nazi essentially. But when we talk about the famous Nietzschean idea of the death of God, he uses that aphorism, like he used a lot of his aphorisms, a bunch of times in a bunch of different books, and often tweaked them as he repeated them. And there's one version, at least, of the death of God aphorism that that goes something like, "God is dead, and we have killed him. Mm-hmm. How will we atone for this horrible crime?" The point of the death of God was not just, people don't believe in religion anymore. Not even just that people will never be able to believe in, a cultural or social or, civilizational universal constant like God. It's also that something is going to replace the God that you've killed.
Yes.
And you will not just simply go on with a big void, in the sky, kind of watching down over everything. And you could, I think, argue philosophically that the rest of Nietzsche's work is the attempt to ask, what do you put there next? How do you replace God without lying, essentially?
Well, I don't think he ever was able to get there. I think it drove him mad.
Yeah.
I mean, because the idea was, we are going to enter this century of, because the death of God, like you say, we have killed God. What that means is that we have advanced as a society for so long that not only do we not need God to explain things, but we have other explanations for everything that used to be kind of magical, right? That we've supplanted, we've become our own authority. And that gets into, you can talk about slave morality and how that emerges out of the Christians, whatever, but we don't need to get into that. But that, entering into what he forecasted as a century, or at least, of deep, deep nihilism, right?
Yeah.
Because when you kill God, basically the idea is that, you have, basically all morality that used to be undergirded by this kind of explanation, by this sort of natural God law, whatever you want to call it, right? All of that morality then loses its fundament and becomes endlessly fungible and able to be used towards any kind of purpose, right? Because without any kind of common understanding and grounding of these values, the values don't, it's not that the values then become invaluable, if I can explain this correctly, but that the values devalue themselves as this nihilism grows deeper, right?
They become instrumental.
Exactly. They become completely instrumentalized. And so you start to see that. I mean, he was right about a lot of things, right? You start to see in the 20th century, especially, I mean, even fucking now, right? You look and you see, evangelical priests sitting with Trump, who has 1,000% paid how many women for abortions or whatever. And it doesn't matter, because this is not where, all of these values have now become instrumentalized towards political will, or will to power, as it very well may be. But the point being that what I'm trying to get at is that what ended up driving Nietzsche mad was that he never could answer the question of what comes after the nihilism. What gets born out of this nihilism? Can anything be born out of it?
Well, it's ironic that you say that, though, because his sister could answer that question. No, I'm serious. She could. She joined the Nazi Party. I don't know if he was there, but Hitler certainly sent a eulogy to be read at her funeral. I think she died in 1936. She was a member of the party, and it's like, I mean, we all know the thing about history is that everything that happened was the only thing that could happen, right? Like for all intents and purposes, there are no other realities. We can't, there's no other path to be taken. and because there's just this one, strip of history that we're all on. But it does seem to me like if you examine everything that, especially that was going on in the late 1800s in Germany, the Völkisch movement, the I don't even know how to pronounce this, I've only read the word, but Ariasafi movement, which is sort of like the more esoteric side of Völkisch ideology, which is necessary. You need an esotericism to go with Völkisch ideology because most of it's made up.
Yeah.
It's pseudoscience, or not even science, it's pseudo-history.
That's where the tool stuff comes from, correct?
Yes, yeah. So I mean, Michael mentioned before the swastika as well. I do want to mention that on Hitler's Catholic school that he went to in Austria, there are swastikas on the awning there of a Catholic school. So this was in the air. This was, I mean, I'm sure it's not like he designed the flag or anything, although I do believe he had a hand in it. This was just something that you would see during your whole life. And this is not a Germanic symbol, really. I mean, of course it is. There's, long instances of the swastika in Europe. Many European, let's say, less than woke European groups use that as an excuse to continue to use the symbol, especially if you go to to Ukraine. But yeah, the Thule Society. So it was started by this guy named von Sabattendorf, who's again, I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, who was actually sort of pushed out of the picture later, and who, by the way, drowned himself in the Bosphorus on the day that Nazis surrendered back in Turkey. But it was essentially like an esoteric society, one of many. Germany was sick with these societies during the early 20th century.
Just to point one thing out, like you were saying, Germany was sick with these societies, this Nietzschean question of what comes after the death of God. Europe in general is sick with these societies. The United States is sick with these societies. They're absolutely everywhere. And a lot of what ends up becoming kind of compressed into the meat grinder and emerges as Nazism as little bits and pieces of all these different esoteric movements. Like a lot of the the Aryan bullshit, the idea of Germans as Aryans as the original people comes from theosophical misunderstandings.
Absolutely. I mean, they believed they believed one of the big reasons that this sort of Aryanism ideology was adopted is because they believed that the ancient Aryans, who were a pure race, had a gland next to the pineal gland. There's an empty space there now where they used to have an extra gland that could that could make them telepathic. And because of and the implication here is Jewish sort of interference and inbreeding and dirtying the race, we unfortunately some shiksas who I'm probably related to had sex with some Rudolphs and Hanses, and they lost that gland.
Just imagine George Costanza going, "You brought out the gland! You brought out the gland, Jerry!"
It was actually a sort of Faustian bargain because they lost the gland, but Jewish women grew giant breasts after that, which they still have to this day.
And they got those from the Germans.
Exactly. Yes. Who by the way, all men and women, everybody in Germany used to have enormous honkers.
Including the men,
Including the men, absolutely. I mean, half of their bodies were covered in these things. And of course, the Jews stole them. But the Thule Society was a bunch of these different societies. There's rumors about the Vril Society and stuff too. I don't want to get into that because there's not a ton of documentation on that, and I don't know that much.
I thought that one was like kind of maybe not as
it's like
serious. Maybe made up a little bit. Like there were pamphlets that were circling around the German state at the time, kind of like saying it was this thing, but it never really was a thing, kind of. Certainly not in the makeup of the Thule Society.
Vril was supposedly like an infinite energy source. Something like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's Elon Musk has tapped into it.
Yeah. He seems like the kind of dude who could genuinely be convinced of that by this time tomorrow.
Yeah.
He's like, we've got the Tesla Model 4. It's powered by Vril.
Yeah.
But like the Thule came about because there was this, essentially World War I was a blood sacrifice. It was, if you were alive during that time period, it was like the apocalypse.
Yeah.
Like there was a scale of destruction, of mayhem, of death. Like unlike the world had ever seen, and especially unlike you could ever imagine. Because remember,
it's hard to overstate like how destroyed Germany was after World War One.
I mean, the crazy thing about it is foreign troops never entered the borders of Germany, which had a really bad psychic effect on the Germans. I swear to God, if a British horseman had just like made it to Berlin or something, we would not be faced with a lot of the problems we had because the fact that foreign troops never really entered Germany, besides a little bit on the edges, there was this a large part of the population who believed that they had actually just been sold out, that it was possible to win the war. Of course, if you look at the actual economic situation, especially the food situation, the manpower situation, totally impossible to win the war.
Yeah, and there's a deep irony to this whole stab in the back bullshit, because one of the main reasons the war actually did end was German soldiers just saying, fuck this.
Yeah.
Suck
and
my
going
dick.
home. Yeah. But I think you two are absolutely right. And it's a thing I come back to in my own thinking and work all the time, that World War I, now we look, well, I was going to say we look back on as, we hardly look back on it at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just the prequel to World War II.
Americans, at least, we should
Well,
say.
yeah. And the scale of destruction that it wrought would have been, indistinguishable from the end of the world.
Yes,
to lots and lots
absolutely.
of people. I think it was Eric Hobsbawm who said that at the end of World War I, going east to west, there was not a single government left standing from France to Japan. That's insane.
Yeah.
None of them ended the wars with the governments they'd started with. And the idea of a war killing, I don't know what the estimates are these days. The last I heard, it was in the 7 million range, something like that.
I'm looking it up right now.
That was just unfathomable. That's not how many people wars
15
killed.
to 22 million deaths.
Oh wow, so it's gone up a lot since I
40
looked.
million casualties total, including those 15 to 23 million, and 23 million wounded military personnel.
Yeah, the sort of wars that Europeans were used to at this time did not go on long enough, and were not fought brutally enough, and did not use things like the fucking Bofors gun enough to kill that many people. A war didn't go on to 1 million casualties, let alone 15 to 22. And I think in a lot of ways, the First World War is kind of a corollary to the Nietzschean death of God played out on the political and the parapolitical map, in the sense that it was the gigantic last blood orgy of this hyper convoluted, incestuous kind of paracolonial system.
It was the crashing end of the Symphony of Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. Of all these interrelated families fighting for, export markets and shit in the same places. That it was an entire economic world order eating itself alive in a kind of, blood frenzy that I don't think most people alive then would have believed human beings would have gone that far in fighting for anything by that point. There was, I think it was fucking Otto von Bismarck after the Franco-Prussian War who said, well, it seems pretty safe to say there aren't going to be any more wars after this one.
He was the
Classic
Fukuyama
line.
of his time.
Yeah. The people really thought there's this kind of, in keeping with all the esoteric societies and the utopian groups that we talked about before, the non-Marxian communists and shit.
Yes.
There was a real feeling, and it seems like particularly among the British, that things like, universal male suffrage and universal education would just produce a world populace sufficiently enlightened that there would never be a real serious war again. And,
Yeah.
and
This
if
sort of Fabian mentality.
Absolutely, that's the exact word for it. And if there were, it would be a minor border skirmish with maybe a dozen dead on each side that would then immediately be settled by treaty.
Yes.
Well, this was a big effect that, this is kind of a side note, but I do want to mention this, is that, at the end of World War I, in what we call the interwar years, like this is when liberalism goes into a deep crisis because of
Absolutely.
this. And it's a world crisis where people are really questioning, basically the liberal project failed. What's next? Is there something next? And you get this collection of historians and theorists and, as it is, economists debating what is to be done about restoring the liberal world order. And out of that, those conferences, one of the most famous being the Walter Lippmann colloquium, named after, of course, Walter Lippmann, the fucking horrible liberal theorist,
Another guy
journalist.
Suck me off.
Yeah. Father of propaganda in a lot of ways. But, out of this is where the term and the kind of, beginning forms of what we call neoliberal thought is born, because what they saw was, liberalism has been completely popularly, not even just politically, but popularly discredited as being a vehicle for progress. And you've got this rising threat of both socialism and communism that is sweeping Europe. And, you've got this other thing that hadn't yet totally formed that, ended up being fascism. Now, what are we going to do? And this is where neoliberalism is born.
Yeah. One of the big, is the plural of impeti, I guess? Impeti for what
Impotence.
became one of the big impotence. If you suffer from big impotence for what would become Keynesianism and kind of the mild parasocialism of the New Deal era here, was the fact that Maynard Keynes was at the Versailles Conference,
Right.
and basically he took a really detailed notes, left a journal that's worth reading, and concluded if these are our options, if what these people are proposing is really what's left to us, we are doomed. Like, the human race is not going to survive.
Yes.
Yeah, he was we've got a
prosper.
5-year plan or we've got a 4-year plan. What are we going to do? We got to do better than that. And he basically was talking about the Soviets and the German state.
Yeah, because Keynes was an orthodox, classical, free market economist before World War I and the Versailles Conference, and he came out of that essentially committed to finding something else because nothing they were talking about there was going to do it.
Well, to get us back to the Thule real quick, this is sort of setting the stage for what we are dealing with here, right? We are dealing with a nation of traumatized people, many of them veterans, who are obsessed both with themselves and their past. And in fact, so obsessed with the past that they create a sort of like mythical, I mean, the stuff that these guys believed is truly incredible. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the hollow earth theory. Where in fact inside of the world is another world. There's a tiny sun at the middle of it. It is a verdant world with advanced races and advanced technologies. This is the same sort of line of thinking where Atlantis comes from. And in fact, many members of the Thule Society actually believe that the Aryans came from Atlantis.
Brace and Liz and Chomsky can see that the hollow earth is actually where I am right now.
Yes, Michael does appear to be in some sort of hollow earth. I didn't want to say anything.
No, it's cool. Nobody knows how to get here.
The hollow earth, well, Admiral Byrd does, but I digress. The hollow earth fascinates me so much because with the Nazis and then with everything that came after, we actually do enter into a hollow earth. We do enter into the subterranean realm. It's not the hollow earth dreamed up by these morphine addicts in the coffee houses of Bavaria, but it's the actual hollow earth, the real hollow earth, the what it actually looks like when you go underground. And what I'm talking about there is Hitler in the bunker, people going mad, suicides.
Yeah.
I'm talking about in Colonia Dignidad, the tunnels that ran underneath it. And when Colonia Dignidad was raided after it was shut down, when they were looking for Paul Schaefer, he would hide in those tunnels, just like Hitler, and I'm sure that was not lost on him. And then in the general sense, during the Cold War, and even now, although now you could say that we've all entered the hollow earth, that there is no hollow earth, we've all gone underground. But even then, the world was crisscrossed by tunnels and by men doing secret things in secret places.
When I hear hollow earth, the first thing that comes to mind after the mystical theory is more mass graves in more mass graves in those 5 years than the earth had seen in its entire combined history before that.
Absolutely. So with the Thule Society, it had a lot of names, and it was not a big society. There's about 350 members in Munich, about 1,500 in Bavaria total. But they were powerful. They were powerful people, and they were well-connected people. There was a mix of aristocracy and former army officers or current army officers, and several names that would actually appear pretty high up on the Nazi roster. I'm talking specifically about Rudolph Hess and Alfred Rosenberg. Rudolph Hess, of course, made the famous Hess flight to Britain during the early stages of, well, technically for the Germans, not the early stages, but in about 1941, possibly because an astrologer told him to go. And he had sort of been driven mad. I don't know by what, possibly by the shit that he was messing with. But these guys would meet and discuss, these sort of esoteric theories that they had. But Munich also had another group of people. In fact, a couple other groups of people that were sort of the opposite of the Thule Society. Those groups were the United Social Democratic Party, the Independent Social Democratic Party, and the Communist Party in its early stages. And so I don't know if a lot of people know this. I'm sure many of our listeners do, but in general, this isn't really discussed. But Germany basically underwent both a social democratic / liberal and a communist revolution at the end of World War I, where in many parts of Germany, workers and soldiers formed councils, formed Soviets, and took over pieces of land for, however long amount of time. This actually went on for quite a few years during the beginning.
Yeah, it was quite a long time, actually.
Yeah, I mean, this was happening up until almost the mid-20s.
Yeah.
Where parts of Germany would just go into revolt. And so in April 1919, a group of, in fact, not communists, but anarchists declare the Munich Soviet Republic. And these guys, they actually, this was sort of popularly known as the coffee house the regime of the coffee house anarchists among citizens of Munich, because it was basically a bunch of like fops and like morons that were in charge of this. I mean, they were in power for 6 days. They declared war on the Swiss for not supplying them with 60 locomotives.
To be fair, I would also declare war on the Swiss.
Absolutely. I already have. And if this podcast will invade, we shoot first.
Just to see
that is the tagline of this podcast. We shoot first.
Will the Swiss fight back?
Absolutely not. They're neutral. They can't fight back. I'm not looking into what neutral means. They have this thing called the redoubt. That means they must doubt their ability to withstand this podcast.
All right.
After about 6 days, some men step in.
Yeah, the communists finally take over,
exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Led by a guy named Eugene Levine, who I believe was Jewish, and actually institute a Soviet republic, or Soviet city-state, as it is. They form a Red Army of tens of thousands of workers, factory workers from Munich, and they took over the city. Now, meanwhile, the social democratic government, because of course there has been a social democratic, regime basically installed in all parts of Germany, flees to a different part of Bavaria. They try to fight. They come there with what's left of government troops and try to fight the Red Army at, and this is a little bit of synchronicity there, Dachau.
Right.
They are repulsed by the burly workers from Munich.
Yeah, we should pause for a second, because what happens here, if people don't know, is that the Social Democrats in Germany team up to basically, they see the communists not as their problematic friends, but like actually as their enemies. Mm-hmm. And they have no interest in teaming with the communists and actually want to fight them to the death,
Yes,
basically.
absolutely. And of course, Germany's army has been severely downgraded after World War One. I mean, there are incredible limitations. It's probably smaller than the NYPD at this point for the whole of the country. And so they are unable to really take back the city. So what they have to do, and this is where I start buzzing a little bit. They make what you might call a Faustian bargain with the Free Corps. Now, the Free Corps are essentially veterans organizations, proto-fascist, most of them, and sometimes even further along than that. I don't know what to call it, who have popped up all over Germany and who are, even in parts of Poland and German parts of Poland. Well, it's all Poland, baby.
Well, basically, we should say also is that the Free Corps it's a like unholy alliance that might sound familiar to some people between basically peasants at the time and middle class members, and also veterans, and basically uniting against industrial city workers, which would be the Communist Party. So you have this kind of there are early paramilitary, fascist gangs basically that roam around in place of any kind of national army, because like you mentioned, there really isn't one after World War One.
The Weimar state is weak. Yeah,
because so many people died, but also because just so many people are not interested, are like, fuck the army.
Yeah.
It's been very unpopular.
All those apocryphal stories about Vietnam vets returning getting spit on the airports, which there is, by the way, no documented evidence of.
Except Rambo.
That actually was happening in Germany, which is people would be like, if you walked around in a soldier's uniform, you would get the shit beaten out of you.
It should be mentioned that these aren't just, vets the way we have vets and they have other jobs, whatever. You don't necessarily know who they are. There's a whole class now in a way there has never been before in a modern nation of guys with severe PTSD, severe psychological problems, amputated limbs, mutilations, all kinds of shit, just kind of desperately wandering around Germany.
I mean, also all unemployed, by the way.
Yes, I was just trying. I was just about to say, trying to look for work, trying to figure out anything they could do to just maintain a living, let alone any sort of decency or respect. And when the Freikorps comes along and becomes not only an organization that will accept them, but an organization that I think the Germans called them the old fighters.
Yes.
And the Freikorps were the first people to use, as far as I know, the first people to use old fighters, not pejoratively, not as an insult, and to celebrate and welcome these guys and say, we want you specifically if you're an old fighter, because, you got stabbed in the back by, well, we'll talk about that. But you deserve better.
Right.
You were fucked over, and we are going to team up and get the people who fucked you.
And the point being, like we said, there are a bunch of unemployable, psychologically damaged men with literally no place to go except for these organizations. And the Thule Society becomes as instrumental here as well as other kind of what you would call kind of like civil society organizations, like leagues and other kind of like popular like social organizations that pop up, because they basically become like nexus points for all of these people to gather in lieu of any kind of any other social economic structure, right?
Yeah, and with the Thule Society in particular, too, they actually form some of the backbone of the resistance to the Munich Soviet Republic. During the time before the government returns to Munich, or excuse me, the Social Democratic government returns to Munich, they actually commit acts of terror. They have pitched battles with the communists in the streets. And this, by the way, I mean, step back and look at this. This is a cult. These are people who believe that Aryans used to be able to have fucking telepathy. They believe that we walk on a hollow earth. Some of these people believe that we have a moon, that there is ice. Some of these people believe that we are ourselves within a hollow earth and that the stars are made of ice and they are suspended in a black sea above us. And these people are going out on the streets and shooting at factory workers. Unsurprisingly, they lose. So what we have is the now a giant force of the Freikorps and the German Social Democratic Party government marching on Munich, and it is April 30th. Now, April 30th, some of you might remember, well, actually, I'm sure none of you remember except for our German listeners, is that there's a holiday that falls on that day whose name I will mispronounce, but Walpurgisnacht or Walpurgisnight. Now, this is one of those holidays, kind of like Halloween, that start out like a pagan holiday, although unlike Halloween, became somewhat Christianized and was sort of adopted into the Christian canon. But it's actually, I believe, in Faust. There is a witches' Sabbath that takes place on that night. But for our purposes, this is a witches' Sabbath. And so it's not lost on me that these troops march in or start marching on the city on that day. Now, the communists are smart. Well, not too smart, actually, because what happens next. But they had a good idea that they didn't fully go through with, and they take some hostages, including 7 members of the leadership of the Thule Society. Now, one of these names, I'm sure that some of our listeners will be will pique their interest. Prince Gustav of Thurn and Taxis, which is, I'm sure some of you remember from the Crying of Lot 49.
And fans, yep.
Exactly. And Countess Hella von Westarp, a German sailor, takes them out in a yard and shoots them, which I think is very poetic. Unfortunately, that night, on the night of Walpurgisnacht, which actually is the night of Walpurgisnight, I just said, the sort of proto-fascist and social democratic groups march on the city. They have overwhelming force. They break the resistance, and they take it over. And when they do that, they kill basically everybody involved with the Munich Soviet Republic. It's a real Paris Commune type situation.
Yeah. I want to pause for a second and just as a backdrop, this is 1919, like we mentioned. Like this is supposed to be the chain revolutions, right? Like this is a big deal. This is what's supposed to be the German Revolution. And what you have is the Liberal Party, the Social Democrats, which, I mean, okay, Social Democrats, liberals, whatever we want to call them. They were Social Democrats, teaming up with fascists to take down what were mostly Bolsheviks, German Bolsheviks, and communists. And I mean, it is such a disaster. Like what happens next? And it's fucking heartbreaking. It is completely heartbreaking. You said that history can only happen one way, but like, this is a point that you point to and you say like, this is not what was supposed to happen.
Yes. Yeah. Well, exactly. That's my whole thing, is people say, this is why I can never forgive. And I know I sound absurd saying this in the year 2020, but you can never forgive the Social Democratic Party in Germany for basically denying us a beautiful future.
You were just talking about, this is supposed to be the chain reaction. I mean, for a bona fide Marxist, the idea of socialism in one country does not exist at this point. And the Russians, who are now in sort of delicate control of Germany, they don't know what the fuck to do if
of Russia, you mean?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, of Russia, not Germany. That would have been different. They don't know what the fuck to do with the idea of a socialism that's supposed to lead to communism if it doesn't roll across Europe.
Right.
They're not prepared for that at all. So this doesn't only change the history of Germany and of the rest of Europe and possibly the rest of the world, but it also profoundly changes the history of what will become the Soviet Union and Russia in particular,
absolutely.
Because they have to figure out a way to keep this thing alive without the entire support network that they were expecting to be there.
I mean, around this time, of course, we have the Soviets marching into Poland. And Liz, cover your ears, please. The miracle, the so-called miracle in the Vistula, where they are somehow turned around. And of course, people alternately blame Trotsky and Stalin for this. I, of course, take the third position where I blame the Poles.
I'm half Polish, and I also blame the Poles. We suck.
I mean, to be honest, if you're losing to the Poles, which has been a country for about 3 months, you're probably not going to win against Germany.
No, our whole thing is that we lose everything. That's like the national identity.
Except
of
without
Poland.
CIA help, right?
Yes.
Solidarity.
Yeah,
But what we have here, though, is we actually do have the Germans basically taking a modern position that they don't even know they're taking, right? With the Social Democrats and the Freikorps uniting, and of course they united in many other parts of Germany. Every single one of these communist revolts was crushed by basically the same exact combination. Rosa Luxemburg shot in the head and dropped in the river. Same exact combination. Social Democratic masters, fascist at the time, foot soldiers. And that presages what we had for the rest of the 20th century, which is, if we take the Social Democrats to be liberals, which they were, align and really melding and becoming one new, it's a dialectic, right? You take the Social Democrats, you take fascist, and then you combine them and you have something new. And to me, the new thing that we have there, if we take a broad view of it, is the 20th century, right? Yeah. Because for after World War II, look at it. All you have are these liberal democratic governments using these fascist governments as foot soldiers, right? I mean, we're talking about Chile, we're talking about Pinochet, we're talking about all over South America, we're talking about South Africa. This Faustian bargain that these liberal democracies make with these fascists, and that what they do is they, in essence, become a new thing.
Yeah, these are talking about the hollow earth. These are the corpses inside the pediment of the sculpture. You know what I mean? These are the people. These are the people walled into the crypt. That we were talking about the Italian fascists earlier, and their comparatively shallow conception of, first via the futurists, everything being about modernity and speed and violence, and then sort of harnessing that to the power of the state via what will become fascism. And I think one of the reasons the German adaptation of fascism and Nazism was more successful and also continues to fascinate people both historically, analytically, and in really unfortunate ways is precisely because of this, because there is this buried underside to it. It's not founded simply on, an idea. It's founded on a pile of dead bodies. And it keeps racking up piles of dead bodies, and it has this subterranean element with which it manages to connect the fixations of fascism as it comes out of Italy all the way back to the subterranean world. And it's kind of a divided subterranean world. The half they want you to see, which is all the sort of pan-Germanic mythos, reaching back to the beginning of time. And then there's this other half of the underground or the hollow world, which is where all the bodies are. Millions and millions of bodies.
Yeah, I mean, even, if you take even the concept of the Reich, I mean, something that is so lost on when people, casually, I don't mean an academic or historian or whatever, but casually, when people talk about Nazism, is that it was obsessed with reclaiming the empire, right? I mean, You talk about reclaiming, literally resurrecting out of the ground, right? You're talking about subterranean, out of the ground, the Roman Empire and the map of the Roman Empire, right? It's like the Reich was, and it's like Hitler didn't even, he kept his own little maps of what the territory that he wanted, secret from even some people within, his closest, circles, because the idea was, no, actually, we're taking all of this. Its empire goals were way more vast and key to even the concept of the Reich than anything the Italian fascists. I mean, the Italian fascists had their, would dally here and there, but it wasn't an empire that it thought of. It wasn't at all. It was even just establishing the state that was more important.
they would try to every once in a while, take a direct translation of a Nazi concept and just import it into Italy, like, Lebensraum.
Right.
Yes.
Spazio
Man
vitale.
Nostrum.
Yeah, and
The
suddenly
things-
they're talking
yeah.
about invading Ethiopia. But
Yeah, it's like-
like Brace was just talking about this, this hollow earth that comes to be sort of an alchemical precipitate for the
Yes.
creation of the modern world. That we kind of get there. This thing we've been calling the spider network, and see this bifurcated subterranean world. One half of which to Germans, the proud public half of this resurrection that Liz is talking about, this unearthing and bringing back to life of the literal physical empire and also the metaphysical empire of the German folk.
Yes.
On the other hand, there's a trench full of, God knows how many millions of corpses. And we get there and look at that and think, be ashamed to waste all this infrastructure.
Right.
You guys really, you dug a lot of ditches, you built some canals, there's some walls here, we like that,
Well, I think Hitler didn't he even say at one point that he had resurrected the Holy Roman Empire? Like, I think
wouldn't be
he
surprised.
literally used that word, resurrect. That was the project.
Sounds
Well,
right, yeah.
I mean, you talk about presaging, and we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that the precursor to the NSDAP, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, was the DAP, the German Workers' Party. The DAP was directly started by the Thule Society as a political organ, right? Like, so the group that became the Nazi Party, which basically with the change of the name, headed by this guy Anton Drexler, himself a Thule Society member, was started out of the occult. And Hitler was sent to join the DAP as an intelligence agent. Hitler was sent there by his commander to sort of check out what these guys were about. And he liked what he heard. And he got a membership card. And he started speaking at meetings. And so what we have there in essence is that the Nazis were a combination of two chemicals here, if we're using this sort of allegory. The chemical, which is acidic and uncomfortable of intelligence work, and the chemical of the occult, of symbols, of history, of magic, of darkness and tunnels, both of them combining into this new thing. And unlike anything the world has ever seen before.
I mean, thoroughly modern innovation in that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. On one side, you can sort of not rationalize, because it's not about being rational at all, but you can use the darkness and tunnels by figuring them as excavation work back to the glorious resurrection.
Yes.
On the other side, the darkness and tunnels lead exactly where you think they lead.
We'd be remiss if we didn't mention the murder here of Walter Rathenau, because the murder of Rathenau really sums up so much of kind of what we're dealing with in this time period. Rathenau's father was like a very important industrialist. Rathenau himself was important to the German war effort during World War I in the economy side, and afterwards a very important post-war politician. And he was also a Jew. In fact, when he was murdered, his murderers, who I'll talk about in a second, actually believed that he was one of the literal, real, no-shit elders of Zion.
Yeah.
The elders of Zion, the protocol of the elders of Zion, by the way, is itself a forgery done by Russian intelligence.
Yes.
Right?
For
so
a
what we
prince.
have here is an intelligence organization, which is what Organization Consul, his murderers were, is essentially a CIA-like organization within the Freikorps that engaged in political murders called the Feme murders, sometimes with a cult bent. We have these people reacting to another intelligence project, and they murder Walter Rathenau, and they kill him on an important date, which coincides with let's say a pagan festivity in German. that would have been familiar to people who follow Volkish ideology. And they believed in that moment that, like, I can't stress this enough, they thought they were killing one of the elders of Zion.
It's imagine being the guy who thought you were doing that.
It's like, dude, I killed one of the elders of Zion.
Yeah, like on the way back to
From the graveyard in Vienna, dude.
No one's gonna believe this.
Holy shit. Like trying to reread Elders of Zion, be like, which guy is he?
No, dude, he's number 2. He's got to be number 2. There's one of the reasons Rathenau is fascinating to me, as any big Pynchon freak will know, is that he is, I would argue, the center of the book Gravity's Rainbow, which is one of my favorite books ever and one of the most complex and insane books ever written, is a seance in which some Nazis, particularly the heads of IG Farben, which was the Nazi industrial chemical cartel, resurrects Walter Rathenau. And they do it kind of as a joke and end up getting more than they meant to. So Pynchon here gives a little explanation of who Rathenau was. It says, Rathenau, according to the histories, was prophet and architect of the cartelized state. From what began as a tiny bureau at the War Office in Berlin, he had coordinated Germany's economy during the World War, controlling supplies, quotas, and prices, cutting across and demolishing the barriers of secrecy and property that separated firm from firm, a corporate Bismarck, before whose power no account book was too privileged, no agreement too clandestine. His father was Emil Rathenau and had founded AEG, the German General Electric Company, but young Walter was more than just another industrial heir. He was a philosopher with a vision of the post-war state. He saw the war in progress as a world revolution, out of which would rise neither red communism nor an unhindered right, but a rational structure in which business would be the true rightful authority, a structure based, not surprisingly, on the one he'd engineered in Germany for fighting the World War. And so I think there is a vision there too of, we've talked about magic and fascism, magic and the occult as they relate to other political disciplines and political economies, but there you have the basis of what will kind of become the magical thinking of neoliberalism. The idea that as he puts it, the cartelized state, the state reorganized as a system of resource cartels, essentially, will include such natural balances within its ecosystem as will, set all things right at all times, as long as you just kind of plug the right numbers into the calculator. And then when the Nazis actually managed to summon the spirit of Rathenau, he tells them this: consider coal and steel. There's a place where they meet. The interface between coal and steel is coal tar. Imagine coal down in the earth, dead black, no light, the very substance of death. Death ancient, prehistoric, species we will never see again, growing older, blacker, deeper, in layers of perpetual night. Above ground, the steel rolls out, fiery, bright, but to make steel, the coal tars, darker and heavier, must be taken from the original coal, Earth's excrement, purged out for the ennoblement of shining steel, passed over. We thought of this as an industrial process. It was more. We passed over the coal tars. 1,000 different molecules waited in the preterite dung. This is the sign of revealing, of unfolding. This is one meaning of mauve, the first new color on Earth, leaping to Earth's light from its grave miles and eons below. But this is all the impersonation of life. The real movement is not from death to any rebirth. It is from death to death transfigured. And, I mean, if there's anything to sum up and harmonize with Braiths was saying about the hollow earth, everything we've talked about with the subterranean, the idea of this entire movement that, Rathenau from the other side of death can see as being a kind of alchemical transfiguration of death, of darkness, of waste, of everything buried and passed over. But what appears to be its real transfiguration into what the Nazis dream of is, as he puts it, not a movement from death to any rebirth. It's only a movement from death to death transfigured.
Yeah, I like, that idea of deeper and deeper and deeper, that there isn't actually an end, but that it goes deeper into the death itself.
Yeah.
And it discovers and uncovers, as it may be, or as you say, transfigures new forms of death and becomes new forms of death itself, the deeper and deeper it goes.
Yeah, and if you read this passage further and further, because it goes on for a while, you can see those deeper and deeper strata of death not ending when Nazism ends, not falling apart with fascism, but becoming the basis of the inorganic chemistry, that fuels so much of the plastics boom that's behind so much of the technological innovation of the immediate post-war, liberal capitalist West. And that the very title of the book, Gravity's Rainbow, it means a bunch of different things. But one of the things he's doing with that idea of gravity's rainbow is kind of visually rhyming the gravity that clutches these dead materials to the heart of Earth and transfigures them with the flight path of a V-2 rocket. It's the same shape as a rainbow, but it ends in destroying the exact thing that it has traveled over. It's a good book.
It's a great book. I'm looking up my copy right over there on my makeshift shelf, and I'm like, I was literally just thinking, like, it's been about 10 years. I should probably pick it up again.
Oh yeah.
I've never read it. I read the, of course, Crime of Lot 49. I've read V, and I read Vineland, I think, when I was much younger. Although I didn't like that one that much.
I think
but
V
I've never
is
read
the best introduction to Pynchon.
Yeah,
that's what I would tell people to
I read that when I was a
with.
teenager, and I love it. I was actually planning on rereading it again.
It's so fun.
Next week.
Yeah.
We have to wrap up pretty soon, and I just wanted to touch briefly on Colonia Dignidad.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that guy.
Yes.
That thing, yeah.
I mean, we've kind of summed it up over the last two episodes, where we had this post-war cult, essentially, that was itself trying to reach into pre-modern times, pre-modern Germanic times, in the mountains of Chile, in a secluded area, interlocked with tunnels, making guns and gas and bombs.
Another, series of subterranean excavations, both the literal ones for the tunnels and the historical ones, trying to, dig up the dead strata of an ancient Bavaria that, of course, when you undertake these cultural projects to reinstate some kind of past, it's always 90% imaginary. It's almost totally made up, but you sort of justify it with a few archaeological relics and then go, see, this is the way it was.
Yes.
So there is I think your idea of framing this all with the idea of hollow earth and the subterranean and the excavated is exactly right, and I wish I'd had it before we started talking.
Well, the thing is too, so we mentioned, I believe, in the last episode about the torture that went on underground there, about even under the cafeteria, men were being electrocuted, their testicles were being squeezed in vices, etc. That kept going, and eventually Pinochet falls from power after a stuttered plebiscite, basically. Which, by the way, guys like Pinochet, Hitler, etc., they love doing plebiscites. They fucking love those, because honestly, if it's a good way to sort of cement your rule, because you don't really have a democracy because people can't vote you out. But if you give them something to vote on, it's technically a democratic maneuver, especially if you can control the outcome, which he did not go well for him. But investigations immediately begin to Colonia Dignidad. But it's a few years until their nonprofit status is revoked, when a few DINA agents really come out front and center and be like, yeah, that was like a torture spot that we had. That was a black site. At a certain point, one of Allende's, I think this is a bit of a poetic synchronicity, is one of Allende's personal bodyguards, who's now the head of the detective agency in post-Pinochet, or excuse me, like the Federal Detective Bureau in post-Pinochet Chile, he is essentially given the case to investigate these guys, and he starts busting in on Colonia Dignidad. He goes there 30 times in 1 year, and he can't find Schaefer. This is in the 90s to the 2000s. Schaefer is being hidden underground, which, again, like I said earlier, must have made him think of his idol, Adolf Hitler.
Oh yeah, yeah.
In interviews, the detective says that sometimes when he was there, he could sense the fact that Schaefer was underground, that he knew he was there, that he knew he just missed him, but he couldn't catch him.
Ooh.
Schaefer eventually flees to, you'll never guess, Argentina, where he's arrested in 2005.
2005, by the way, 2005.
Yeah.
2005, exactly. You can actually watch video of Paul Schaefer's arrest.
It's
on
weird.
YouTube.
It's very
it's
weird.
Totally surreal. And it's
He
in a
does
gated
not
community.
react. He reacts a way that makes me uncomfortable.
Exactly. He's sent back to Chile, where he was charged with the murder of a guy named Juan Meno, a member of Allende's party, and just like I believe, artistic photographer. Schaefer dies in 2010 of heart failure. But a few years before that, they discovered that giant weapons cache that I talked about last episode of grenade launchers, etc. Again, buried under the earth. And you know what? You'd think now, us having talked about this, that'd be like, well, this place is shut down, right? This is done.
After all those children, the Catholic Church, that's got to be over, right? Like, there's not a Catholic Church anymore, is there?
Well, it actually changed its name in the 90s to Via Bavaria. And you can go there today and have a nice cup of orange juice, a good Bavarian meal, and stay in their hostel.
No one's ever had a good Bavarian meal.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I don't know what it is.
Thing.
I'm imagining like a gray sausage.
I think that's right. A big
like-
slice of black bread.
Mm-hmm.
A beer that's it's
Yeah.
like the consistency of
No,
road tar.
I don't think they serve beer there. I do think they literally only serve, I believe apple juice, actually. They have an apple orchard.
It's still
What?
a very perverse place.
Exactly.
Yeah. What is it with fucking evil people and being teetotalers?
So, well, hey,
Vegetarian
present
Hitler.
company excluded.
Oh yeah, we're not all that way, but
Yeah. So the story of Schaefer is over, but the story of the Colonios, many of whom left the colony, went back to Germany. There's actually, the German government pays out a stipend to former members of the colony because so many members of the German government at different points went to the colony, looked around and said, no, this seems good. All good, man.
yeah.
And so they're paid a small stipend. There's actually a research project right now. I believe it's colonia-dignidad.com where researchers in universities in Germany are putting up interviews and testimonies and stuff. But I want to say that like Schaefer died in our time, in our world, but I don't believe he's buried in the hollow earth. But like the spirit of what he had faded into the rest of us, right? It's like smoke. If you smoke a cigarette indoors, the smoke goes up and then it sort of dissipates. But what it really does is go into your walls. And so this, to borrow a phrase from a very good book, this human smoke, right? And I'm talking about the human smoke of everybody from Eugene Levine to the Prince of Thurn and Taxes to the Jews of World War II to the post-war dead in mass graves around South America and Africa and Asia. All of that became this human smoke that has faded into the walls, and that shaped the world that we're in today.
Yeah, and it really troubles me to know about American black sites in Poland or in Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, or I believe there's officially been one discovered in Romania. And to think there's no reason in the world to assume that in 2050 a few people won't be sitting around talking about those exactly the way we're talking about this right now.
Absolutely.
I don't see a compelling reason to think any of this ever actually changed. You know,
No, not at all.
The techniques not only get passed on, they seem to get worse as time goes on. The personnel changes, but the roles the personnel play, both in an administrative sense and in sort of an archetypal mythic sense, seem to stay the same. You know, the dramatis personae always seems to be the same. So the fact that these places, you can shut them down, and obviously should, but the idea that by shutting one down you have ended the phenomenon is not only not true, it's actually the kind of thing that the people running them would like you to believe.
I think too, to circle back to kind of what we talked about at the beginning of the episode, we are very much still in a world where God is dead. And
Yes.
we are very much still in the age and the throes of increasing nihilism. And, it is a deep, acidic river that flows through pretty much everything in our world, in our culture, in our art, in our politics, in our bodies. We are creatures of nihilism. We are not outside of it. No one is outside of it. We are shaped and formed by it. That is to say, it's a condition that we all live in. And, this, I'm reminded of, we were talking about, this kind of mythic Volkish that the Nazis were creating, is that, this is happening in other parts of the world right now. Like there was a piece in Harper's like a couple years back that's excellent. I think it was called The Call of the Drums, that is talking about, the far right parties in Hungary and them, clinging and trying to resurrect this basically, ancient tribal Hungarian past of this, bringing back Attila the Hun and, anyone in between, and these kind of resurrecting this ancient culture as people are trying to, to feel any kind of sense of purpose and get themselves unmoored in any kind of, or to stop being unmoored in any kind of way, and that's the nihilism that we live in.
Yeah, not so many years ago, I think maybe 2013, I remember hearing the head of the Golden Dawn in Greece respond to accusations that he was a Nazi. And he said, I'd rather be called a Nazi than a Jew, because at least the Nazis have clean hands.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and he said that in front of a big crowd making a speech. I believe he was on top of a bridge talking to people below. And I walked around for like an hour after reading that, feeling like I was in one of those Philip K. Dick, time warp things where the highway wasn't going to be there anymore.
Yes.
Because it was like this, I just broke into a different world, didn't I? Like this has got to be a different place. But no, it's been in that exact same subterranean space we've been talking about, waiting, and we have dug up so much else from that space for our convenience, for our use around the world, that the other shit is going to come oozing up along with it.
Well, it's if we think about this, if the ritual sort of blood sacrifice of World War I is what summoned Wotan, what summoned Hitler, and Hitler's blood sacrifice of World War II, that summoned what we live in today, right? So that, the only book by William Faulkner I've ever read is Requiem for a Nun. The only one I've ever read. The other ones, it's like, I get it, I know the N-word too. But it is a line from that. It's a very famous line that says, "The past is not dead. It's not even past." And whenever I encounter this stuff, that sort of rings through my head.
Yeah. The past is not only not past, it's in the process of continuous transformation. And we don't know how the dead are going to return to us when they do. We don't know what faces they're going to have.
But we know they will.
Yeah, that we do.
Well, that conversation really perked me up, guys.
Yeah, that was a real uplifting one.
We fixed the problems.
I feel
They're
bad,
over.
like, for ending. I feel like we ended this on like a very, like, dour note, but this stuff is serious, you guys.
Well, one thing actually I want to say that I wanted to say during the episode, but I couldn't think of a way to say it that made me sound sane, which is that,
It's always a good sign.
like, I'll be honest with you, I do waffle between thinking of Hitler as the archetype of Wotan and Wotan himself. But the one thing that I do know from all of my experiences in the world is that it doesn't matter if somebody is the avatar of a god or if somebody is the archetype of a god. You can still put him down. That's the thing. You can nobody is impenetrable with the bullets. Hitler did survive a lot of assassination attempts. I will say that. He survived an enormous amount of sometimes well thought out, mostly not, assassination attempts. But at the end of the day, he proved himself that you can pierce it. And you can pierce anything in this world. Nobody is untouchable. And so that's sort of what I want to impart on people is that nobody is untouchable.
And I think in a fascinating sort of way, he died of the myth dying. That's one of the things that's always fascinated me about Hitler. That there were any number of points in that war when he could, in sheerly strategic terms, have just stopped and said, okay, yeah, man, I really took over a lot of territory. Wow.
Like, we're good.
I got a Roman-ass empire
I beat
here.
France.
Yeah, exactly. But no, he was driven by this compulsion of, the mythological vision he had, and it was the death of that vision that broke him. Not
Absolutely.
any actual necessary military defeat. And I think in the same way, it can be easy, especially now when there's so much news packed into so little time, to focus on individual, really small defeats and reverses and successes and whatever, and we lose the vantage, the kind of zoomed out camera focus to think about going after not just point A, point B, point C, but the vision and how killing that can destroy the rest. Kill the body, the head will die, sort of thing.
Absolutely. So I got to say that this has been, I think, my favorite series of subseries or whatever we're calling it that we've ever done. Michael, you are such a fantastic guest. I know that our listeners are big fans, really, and I'm over the moon about how much fun this has been these past couple episodes. And I got to say, I can't wait to do it again.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been really, I'm not bullshitting you, a privilege to be on these. I've had so much fun.
This has been a blast.
Yeah, the show is so great. I mean, I've been listening to it since the first day you did it. So, yeah, being on here has been fantastic. The best podcasting type thing I've ever done, easily.
So you can follow Mr. Judge here at Corpse in Orbit on Twitter, and check out Death is Around the Corner podcast, which believe me, you like hearing this, guys. I'm telling you, I wish sometimes I listen to myself speak. I'm like,
boy, young Chomsky could really, put some juice onto this to make it a little deeper.
but Michael here, he's got it down. But the thing is, that's the price. That's the price, because I'm Jewish, so I do get several $1,000s a month out of your tax money. But I also have to talk like this, which is,
we didn't make that trade. I'm sorry. I have nothing to say about it.
It's okay. I mean, I get to be one of not the youngsters of Zion, I guess they call it.
Oh my God.
Well,
okay.
tykes.
On that note.
All right. Signing off. My name, of course, is Brace Belden.
I'm Liz.
Liz thought I was going to do a funny name there. I can see it.
I did. I thought you were.
And we are joined by producer Walter Schellenberg. I'm just kidding, by producer Young Chomsky. And that is TrueAnon.
Bye-bye.
Let's go shoot him. Jeffrey Epstein. Let's go shoot him. Jeffrey Epstein.